Good morning, everyone. We are continuing with our How to Work with People based on Swami's wonderful Art of Supportive Leadership. Let's start with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, dearest friend Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Help us to move through this world in perfect attunement with your divine light, to make all our decisions, to guide all our feelings, to coordinate all our actions with your guidance and your grace. We are your children. Bring us home to thee. Om, peace. Amen. Okay. So we are in the chapter which is called Work with People's Strengths. So let's see what Swami has to say. In working with individuals too, concentrate on helping them to develop their natural strengths. When he says that, because we were talking about, yesterday we were talking about the power of positive magnetism and how everything is a result of how one vortex of energy interacts with another vortex of energy. We were talking about the way the whole enterprise functions. So now he's talking about in working with individuals also, concentrate on helping them to develop their natural strengths, which is to say, to create positive vortexes. Many think to help others by pointing out their weaknesses. There you have it, don't you? Many think to help others by pointing out their weaknesses. Generally speaking, however, people improve more by magnetizing their virtues than by brooding on their shortcomings. Oh, there's so much implied in those sentences. We're going to explore it in a few minutes. In concentration on their faults, they tend, again, like those black holes in space, to allow their energy to be absorbed by negative thoughts, such as discouragement and insecurity. Soon, there is no energy left for creative self-development. Only in creative expansion of awareness is it possible to deal with inner weaknesses effectively. When a person is encouraged to concentrate on developing his strengths, they soon give him the positive magnetism he needs to give battle to his faults. This was, and this is a phrase you probably heard hundreds of times in this series. This was Swami's genius as a leader. He tended to know what you could do, and he understood this. You know, this inclination to list out weaknesses and think what you need to know is what's wrong with you, and then you can fix what's wrong with you, and then you'll be a better person. And in the whole corporate culture of the world, it's just everything is focused toward what's wrong with you. I became so conscious of this and so conscious of its deleterious effects. I remember once I was leading a retreat. I think it was a retreat for women, probably. I used to do a lot of those years ago. And I asked everyone in the room, women are very forthcoming as a group. And sometimes I have jokingly thought that the men in our lives would be horrified by the secrets we tell each other. Even when we're very new acquaintances, we just tend to tell all the secrets just out there. That's just what women are like, which is great fun. And being a female, I enjoy that myself. I remember once I was teaching a weekend retreat at, well, I'll call it the Expanding Light. At that time, it was the meditation retreat at Ananda Village. And it was my job to lead weekend programs. That's what I did for a period of time. I was on every weekend. that particular weekend, just by chance, and it didn't usually turn out this way, all the guests, and there were about 8 or 10 of them, it was all men. So I was leading these groups for this, and I was very involved with them. It was very interactive. I was the focalizer and the facilitator, but the whole crowd was masculine. And I finally said to them, it was like playing tennis without a partner. I would just lob the ball over the net, and they would observe it. It would land, it would roll around for a while, and then it would stop. And nobody would toss it back to me. Finally, I told them that we simply cannot go on like this. There has to be a change in magnetism. And of course, they all laughed because they knew exactly what I was saying, and they began to make an effort. And I'm not talking about all men. I'm just talking about masculine and feminine. You know, masculine is very impersonal. It observes, it watches. Feminine just gets in there and, you know, needs all the tiny details. That's just what we're like. So anyway, I was leading this women's retreat, and I was very aware of the fact that the real transformation we're seeking will come when we generate positive energy. And so I asked them all, because here's where I was going. At a retreat like this, just even in the first opening circle, a women's retreat, you will know sort of like who died, who was betrayed, you know, who's desperately trying to have a baby, who's just had a baby, you know, and whose son is on drugs, you know, just like you'll know everything in the introductory circle, because it's usually the angst that has brought them there. So I said, just for a change, I want you to introduce yourself by telling us what your best quality is and the most wonderful thing that's happened to you recently. But what was fun was the first person could do it, the second person could do it. By the third person, they were tossing in a few of the negative experiences. And by the fourth person, the instruction was completely lost. And I had to renew it and start over. But it was tremendously instructive for everybody in the room to see how quickly we all wanted to go and start talking about our weaknesses and our struggles and what was wrong. Now, I wasn't trying to get them to suppress it or to shine on a different reality. It's just it's the half full, half empty glass question. But Swamiji has shown us, and I've certainly learned this, especially in group dynamics and then working with yourself. In my own life, Swamiji wanted me to write. And this is something that he put forward to me from the very beginning. I think it was my first year that I was there that he told me he wanted me to write a serious biography of him, which I was 24 when he told me. I was 72 when I actually published the book that he wanted me to write. And it was part of my psyche for all of those years in between. In fact, it was the dominant feature of my life for all those years in between. And he wanted, from the beginning, he wanted me to be a writer. And he kept trying to, you know, sort of get me set up to be a writer. And I just simply couldn't do it. I had just serious complexes. And I'm not going to break my own rule and tell you a big story about my weaknesses. But I could, because it was a big deal. And I just couldn't do it. And I remember the day that Swami came and said to me and said, you know, this isn't working. He said, essentially, oddly, you're completely confident when you speak, but when you have to take those same words and write them, you just fall to pieces. You can't do it. So he said, let's go with your strengths and see if you can build up the confidence to be able to write. And now that I have published a few books, it's different. But for many years before I published any books, because the first one I published was like 2006, and I came to Swami in 1971. And during all that period of time, I had tremendous service, talking, which I just did without hesitation. But from Swami's point of view, my entire speaking career was to give me the confidence to write. Isn't that interesting? It wasn't that it was useless, of course, but it was because I had this other weakness that I couldn't confront directly. But if I developed confidence because of the things I could do, then I would be able to do it, which in fact, it worked. It worked exactly as he said it would work. But what if? What if he just kept telling me that I was supposed to write? I think I would have crumbled into dust and conceivably left the path. It would just be more than I could do. So I know from personal experience exactly how that works. There was another person who came, and she was a very good businesswoman, and she was just a very strong personality, very positive personality, but very strong, capable, had notable success before she came to Ananda, which not everyone does, either because we came so young we never did anything, or we never did anything because we never felt in tune enough with this world to do anything. So there were lots of reasons. But she, by contrast, had proven success. And Swamiji, wanted to help her. And so he created this project for her. Now, the logic of that project was that it should not have been freestanding. It had to do with the resources that he had created. It should have been a department in something else, but he made it a totally freestanding entity, developed it and wanted her to develop it as a sort of like its own department, even though there was no logic to it. And somebody said later, why don't we just make that part of this or that? Swami said, because she needs a project that's entirely her own. Now, yes, it would have been nice if she could have learned to work more with others and so on like that, which over time she did. But he started with, she's an entrepreneur, she can do it, but she'll only be able to do it if we leave her alone and let her do it, which she did. She did it very successfully. And then gradually from that, one thing leads to another. I mean, Swami just had this insight into people and this courage to follow it. So instead of saying, we need someone to do this job, you do this job, he would ask first, who are you? How does your energy flow? What will give you strength? What will make you confident? Even more, what will give you joy? Because if we're doing something that's joyful, there's just so much more positive energy flowing. And what he says here in the book, in just a few sentences, Swamiji is so succinct that sometimes you miss the extraordinary insight that he's expressing, because he's reduced it down to 3 sentences. When you have that positive energy flowing, well, multiple things happen. It gives you confidence and courage, so that then when you become aware of a weakness, you don't feel so devastated. See, what happens is when you just point out people's weaknesses, because all of us live with massive insecurity, it's a very rare person who actually really feels confident and strong in themselves. Even sometimes the people who appear to have the most sort of bravado about who they are and what they're doing, almost always there's enormous weakness behind it. It's because until we are secure in God, we know that we're vulnerable. So we think somehow that see, this is where the mistake comes. People think the only reason you're not different is because you don't know. So I'm going to tell you, you have a tendency toward jealousy, you react too emotionally, when you sing, I hear your character weaknesses in it, and essentially what you're saying is be different. Well, sometimes it's a surprise to learn that I am this way. But most of the time, people either know it already, or they sense that it's true, or else they live with this sort of undifferentiated mass of insecurity. And when you start putting names on it, well, when I was first beginning on my life with Ananda, I have a keenly observant nature, and I have a mind that can put the pieces together. So I thought what people wanted from me was exactly this. They wanted me to tell them what was wrong with them. Fortunately, now, and this has been a flaw for those of you who know me, I have to just, full disclosure, this is something that I've had to struggle with, because I have had the false idea that if you name something, it's the same as banishing it from your life. And it just isn't true. One of my friends said to me very early on, God bless her, she really loves me. So she said it this way: you explain my problems to me more clearly than I want to know them, which was a perfect articulation. And then the thought had to come to me, then why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? The reasons were complex. One of them was I myself was a notion of insecurity, and I was hoping to banish all these qualities in myself, and I didn't know how, so I thought naming them would banish them. So I just was extending that to others, and then what happened is people extended the favor back to me and to explain my problems more clearly than I wanted to know them. And I realized that it was a horrible experience. And far from giving me the strength to go forward. I mean, there are a few people who are like that. Swami referred to Shivani, and who's one of the founding members of Ananda, Italy. She's an American, but she's lived there for decades. And Swami remarked about her with great respect. She loves to be corrected, is what he said about her. And he was also saying that in contrast to me and most others who are glad to be corrected, but we don't love it, because there's always the first impulse is to collapse into despair. And it's nice to say that we wouldn't do that, but we do. We just become obsessed with our weaknesses. And the more obsessed we are with our weaknesses, the more difficult it is to generate positive energy. And so this goes back to what we were talking about yesterday, a positive flow of energy, the whole image of the river and the whirlpools that form. And how do you get rid of the whirlpools? Well, by increasing the flow of the river. So when I was just incapable of sitting and writing, Swami sent me out to speak, because then I learned that I had something to say, that I refined my ability to say it. I learned hard lessons about what's really helpful to people and isn't helpful to people. And I began to really feel a flow of inspiration, a flow of understanding, a flow of, I really do know something about the path, and if I explain it to people in the right way, it's really helpful to them. I mean, that creates this really wonderful positive flow. So then when in that context that I notice, sometimes I'm too blunt, sometimes I'm not sensitive, often my emotions get away from me, or as one of my dear friends said it to me perfectly, I'm not right as often as I think I am. All of those things, which were, tough to swallow, but they came into the context of energy that was working. Where if you're paralyzed, and then somebody tells you what's wrong with you, or you're deeply insecure and people just lay down on you what's wrong with you, it's very hard to keep your energy going after that. So if you're working with the whole team, and I'll go back to this, Swami, one of Swami's rules, guiding principles of Ananda, was that even if a project was a very good idea, if there was no one for whom it was spiritually beneficial to work on that project, then Swami would just drop the project. Because if it wasn't spiritually beneficial for the people involved, what was the point of doing it? This is where there is dharma, there is victory. And so many, many good ideas at Ananda, that Swami had, wonderful ideas, they never got expressed because there was never anybody for whom it was spiritually beneficial to work on it. And so so Swamiji would develop initiatives and develop projects based on who was there. And I was using the example of that woman who was a good entrepreneur. That was a project that Swami had had in mind for a long, long time. But finally there was someone who could execute it. And so now, let's do it. So this is also, you also, if you give someone a project that does not play to their strengths, then the amount of good energy they can give you is very limited. And so the total flow of the river is diminished. If you give everybody as much as you are able, you have to be practical in your idealism, but as much as you are able, if you encourage and allow and facilitate people's ability to flow with their strengths, then you get the best and the most energy out of everybody. And I speak from both observation and personal experience, gradually that positive energy gives you the strength to absorb your weaknesses and overcome them. You know, mine was a lifelong cycle of learning how to write, which he started with me in my early 20s, and I finished it in my 60s, but I finished it. I did it. And I would never have done it by any other method. Nothing else, I don't believe anything else would have worked. So one, talk about loyalty to, your leader. When you really see that the person who's responsible for guiding your work is thinking about you and not just using you for another purpose, then the bonds of loyalty and friendship are tremendous. Bear in mind, this book started with soldiers. This book started with officers leading their men sometimes into death and having their men follow them with unhesitating commitment. And it's very helpful, even when your enterprise bears no relationship to that you, as Swami used the phrase, you pick the whole thing up from the highest string. And if you understand the principles from the highest level, then you can also figure out how to apply them in the microcosm that you may be working with. So all of these go with people's virtues. And I'm going to actually just read Swami's words again because they're really brilliant. In working with individuals too, concentrate on helping them to develop their natural strengths. Many think to help others by pointing out their weaknesses. Generally speaking, however, people improve more by magnetizing their virtues than by brooding on their shortcomings. In concentration on their faults, they tend, again, like those black holes in space, to allow their energy to be absorbed by negative thoughts, such as discouragement and insecurity. Soon there is no energy left for creative self-development. Only in creative expansion of awareness is it possible to deal with inner weaknesses effectively. Creative expansion of awareness. That's how we deal with inner weaknesses. When a person is encouraged to concentrate on developing his strengths, they soon give him the positive magnetism he needs to give battle to his faults. This is another way of thinking about that, creative expansion of awareness. It's like I may have a fault within me, and it's it may even be a big one. Maybe it's a big black blob on the lens. And think of it like, there's a whole field of consciousness, and I have a black blob. And if that black blob is on the palm of my hands, and I take the palm of my hands and I put them up to my face, and when I open my eyes, all I can see is the black blob, and that becomes my self-definition. If I even put my hands out in front of me, the black blob hasn't changed size. It may still fill my whole palms, but my palms no longer define my field of vision. So even now, the black blobs are there. They're the same size as they were, but I can see the whole scene in front of me. I can look again, but even if I look directly at the black blob, I still see a lot around it. This is the creative expansion of awareness. When my entire reality is defined by the black blob, naturally I'm overcome by the force of it. And it's very hard for me to see alternative solutions. All I can feel and see is that black blob. Creative expansion of awareness gives me a context in which to place it. I remember at a certain point in my life when I was beginning to realize that I had a mental habit of holding the black blob up to my face, I just decided that even if all of those negative things were true, overall, if you weighed the whole thing, and my phrase was, I'm still a pretty nice person. I didn't even say that I was a very nice person because the black blob was too big, but I was a pretty nice person. And you know, a lot of people are awful, so at least I'm a pretty nice person. That's not bad. I've done a few good things in the world. And that was because of the creative expansion of awareness. And you see how it works? And how vividly important it is to keep that straight? And how, if we're responsible for helping people to be productive, what to speak of, to overcome their weaknesses and become fine people, how magnificent it'll be. It's not that we're never put into uncongenial situations. When Master first came to, when Swami first came to Master, the monks were working on building India Center at the Hollywood Church, which was this building. And Swami was thrown into the crew to do the building. Swami says he just has no aptitude for that kind of work. But with good spirit, for a number of weeks, or perhaps it was months, I don't know, he hacked away at the thing. And he said, you know, to drive a nail, it would take 7 blows against his thumb, 2 against the wood, and then the final one would actually hit the nail. When he finally was transferred off that project, he said to the professional contractor who was in charge, I really learned a lot on this job. And the contractor just said, really? So it's not that we should never be asked to do that which is not natural to us. I mean, that would be just not practical. But eventually, and not very long after, Master moved Swami to answer people's questions, to answer their letters, to discuss the teachings with them, to administer and then respond to the quizzes that were part of the home study courses, and all of that. That was just natural to Swami. So his energy really began to flow. And, you know, in a spiritual organization especially, and I feel this is a mistake, sometimes we think, well, if you were really dedicated, you would be willing to do anything. Yes, that's true, of course. But if I, who am making that decision, am really concerned about you, I'm also going to ask, you know, where does your energy flow naturally? And how can we help you to become stronger? Not merely how can we use you to do something that you have no affinity for. And so it's all of these factors have to be adjusted together. And it's good for us to be humble. We said in this book here, even the leader should not assign jobs that he's not willing to do. But don't fall into the trap, well, if you were really dedicated, you would just do whatever is asked of you. Yeah, if you're really dedicated and it's really needed, you really will. But if you really want to give, if I or you are highly motivated to have meaningful work, to serve, to share, to expand, then there's going to be a natural direction of our energy. And it is in the best interest of everyone to sensitively attune to that and do our best to open the doors to help one another. God bless you, my friends.